I stood there under the blinding sun, squinting hard at the empty, shimmering spot where our car had been parked just 10 minutes before. My wife, Isabel, and her inseparable friends, Olivia, Megan, and Harper, had vanished completely. Just gone. At first, a familiar weariness washed over me, thinking it was just another one of their cruel, stupid pranks. My job as an IT engineer had been grinding me down lately. Long hours staring at screens, dealing with endless problems, and Isabel had insisted this road trip to Megan's lake house was just what I needed. She'd framed it as a chance to bond with her crew, as she put it, ignoring my obvious lack of enthusiasm. I knew how these trips went. They were always pulling stunts like this, pushing boundaries, testing my patience, seeing how much I'd endure before I finally snapped. 5 long years of marriage had somehow accustomed me to their little games, the thinly veiled insults, the way they'd share mocking laughs at my expense, the way Isabel would chime in, joining them instead of ever, even once, standing up for me. But this felt different, colder somehow. My phone pinged in my pocket. A message from Isabel. Just grabbing some drinks inside. Wait for us. LOL. It read, the casual cruelty of it hitting me like a physical blow. They weren't just grabbing drinks. My company smartphone, the one I needed for work, was still plugged into the car charger, its cord dangling uselessly from the empty space. My wallet, containing my ID and every cent I had, was tucked securely in the glove box. All I possessed now was the faded t-shirt and worn jeans I stood in, and a sickening, growing pit churning in my stomach as the agonizing minutes crawled by. We'd been on this forced road trip for 3 excruciating days already, and my misery had been a constant companion. Isabel had practically dragged me along, pleading and promising it would be fun, a real chance for me to finally connect with her friends. I hadn't bought it then, and I certainly wasn't buying it now. Her friends, Olivia always leading the charge with Megan close behind, treated me like an unwanted accessory, an inconvenient appendage to Isabel they had to tolerate. Their conversation was a minefield of cutting jabs disguised as jokes and shared histories I was deliberately excluded from. Harper usually just watched, offering a faint, noncommittal smile that did nothing to lessen the sting. But I went anyway, because somewhere, buried deep beneath the resentment and exhaustion, I thought I still loved her. Or maybe I just desperately wanted to believe I did. The gas station, Dusty Trails Gas and Go, was a desolate outpost in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Just a squat building with peeling paint, a flickering neon sign advertising cheap coffee, and a single, rusty gas pump standing sentinel under the oppressive sun. I ducked inside quickly to use the grimy bathroom, assuming foolishly that they'd wait. They always waited, eventually, after prolonging the joke just long enough to maximize my discomfort. Except this time, they didn't. An hour bled into the shimmering heat haze. I paced the cracked, sun-baked pavement, kicking loose pebbles, my throat tight with a mixture of anger and rising panic. I kept telling myself they'd reappear any second now. Tires would crunch on the gravel. Isabel's voice would call out, laced with false innocence. Gotcha, Ethan. But the highway remained stubbornly silent, stretching empty in both directions. I spotted a dilapidated motel sign down the road, the paint faded, letters missing. Maybe they could help. I trudged over, the heat radiating off the asphalt. The office door was locked, but a curtain twitched in a nearby window. I knocked tentatively. A thin, suspicious face peered out. "We're full," the woman snapped before I could even speak, letting the curtain fall shut. So much for help. Defeated, I walked back to the gas station, the feeling of isolation pressing down on me. 2 hours evaporated. Sweat plastered my t-shirt to my back, dripping down my neck, and my throat felt like sandpaper. My mind relentlessly replayed the petty cruelties of the past few days, each memory a fresh stab. The way Megan had accidentally spilled her scalding coffee right onto my lap yesterday morning, her smirk barely hidden as Isabel offered a half-hearted apology for her. How Harper had whispered something conspiratorially to Isabel last night, making her giggle uncontrollably while pointedly glancing my way. How Olivia just observed it all, that cool, detached amusement dancing in her eyes, never interfering, just watching me squirm. Even the cheap, obviously regifted watch Isabel had given me for my birthday last month, probably something Olivia or Megan hadn't wanted, felt like another tiny humiliation in a long, unending chain. I should have seen this coming. Of course I should have. They'd been escalating, building up to something bigger, crueler, and I'd been too exhausted, too beaten down, too stupidly hopeful to notice the signs. The rumble of a heavy engine shook me from my spiraling thoughts. A large truck pulled up near the pumps, its air brakes hissing. The driver, a big man with a thick gray beard spilling over his plaid shirt and a stained baseball cap pulled low, leaned out the open window, his gaze assessing. "You okay there, buddy?" he asked, his voice raspy but surprisingly kind. "Been standing out here a good while, looking pretty lost." His simple question, the unexpected note of concern in his rough voice, hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, hot and sudden. No, I wasn't okay. Not even close. The carefully constructed dam inside me finally cracked. They weren't coming back. Isabel wasn't coming back for me. This wasn't a joke anymore. It was abandonment. I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my voice steady, the shame burning in my throat. "Yeah, my ride," I started, the words catching. "They sort of left me behind." My gaze dropped to the cracked pavement. "You think maybe you could give me a hand?" He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, like this wasn't the first time he'd encountered someone stranded and desperate out here on this lonely stretch of highway. "Hop in," he grunted, gesturing toward the passenger door with his chin. "Where you headed?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. I didn't even know. What home? Back to Isabel? Back to the hollow life we'd supposedly built together? But as I heaved myself up into the high cab, the worn vinyl cool against my skin, something sharp and decisive shifted inside me. A surge of cold fury replaced the panic. 5 years. 5 years of her mocking laughter, her casual dismissals, her unwavering loyalty to the friends who treated me like insignificant garbage beneath their expensive shoes. It all came rushing up, hot, heavy, and suffocating. I stared blankly out the passenger window as the dusty trail's gas and go shrank rapidly in the side mirror, disappearing into the heat haze like a bad dream. The truck driver didn't pry or push for details, just put the truck in gear and kept driving, humming a low, rumbling old country tune under his breath. My hands, resting on my lap, clenched involuntarily into tight, white-knuckled fists. I could have asked to borrow his phone. I could have called Isabel, screamed at her, demanded answers, pleaded for her to turn around. But what good would it do? What would she possibly say that I hadn't heard 1,000 times before? "Oh, Ethan, it was just a joke, babe. Lighten up. Don't be so sensitive all the time. You just don't understand our sense of humor." I'd heard every excuse, every deflection, every gaslighting phrase in her repertoire. Every single time I dared to complain, to voice my hurt about her friend's relentless cruelty, she'd roll her eyes, sigh dramatically, and tell me I was the one with the problem, that I just didn't get them. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I never would truly understand that kind of casual malice disguised as friendship. But standing there utterly alone on that scorching pavement, abandoned like some unwanted stray dog they'd grown tired of, I finally, brutally, realized something else. They didn't get me either. Not even slightly. And Isabel, my wife, the woman who was supposed to be my partner, my ally, she had chosen them over me. Again and again, and devastatingly again. The trucker eventually pulled over at a dusty, unmarked crossroads, the intersection of two desolate highways stretching toward distant, hazy horizons. He pointed a thick finger toward one of the roads. "Oak Creek is that way," he said, his voice still gruff. "Nearest town with anything resembling civilization." He tipped his stained cap slightly. "Good luck, man." I managed a choked nod, my throat too tight to form words, and slid out of the cab. The truck rumbled away, leaving me enveloped in a cloud of dust and an unnerving silence. My cheap sneakers scuffed against the loose dirt on the shoulder of the road, the relentless sun beating down on my exposed head. No phone, no wallet, no money, no ID, absolutely no plan. Just me, the clothes on my back, and the vast, indifferent expanse of the open road stretching out before me. A desperate, panicked part of me screamed to turn back, to somehow get back to the gas station, find someone, anyone, to call her, to fix this mess, to rewind time. But another part, a stronger, colder, newly awakened part, kept pushing me relentlessly forward, one step after another down the baking asphalt toward Oak Creek. I was done being the punchline, done being the pathetic guy they all laughed at behind cupped hands, done being the compliant doormat. Isabel and her vicious little clique thought they'd finally won, thought they'd succeeded in breaking me completely this time. But as I trudged onward toward the unknown town of Oak Creek, a strange, unexpected calm began to settle over the storm inside me. They hadn't broken me. Not really. They'd inadvertently, ironically, set me free. I had no idea what awaited me in that unfamiliar town. No clue how I'd find food, where I might sleep, or how I could possibly survive with absolutely nothing to my name. But for the first time in 5 long, suffocating years, I wasn't consumed by the crippling fear of what Isabel would think. I wasn't bracing myself for the next barbed comment from Olivia or Megan. I wasn't trying to decipher Harper's ambiguous smiles. I was alone. Yes, terrifyingly so, but a flicker of defiance sparked within me. I wasn't helpless. The road stretched out ahead, seemingly endless and starkly empty under the vast, unforgiving sky, and I just kept walking. They had left me behind, discarded me like trash. But maybe, just maybe, that was the best, most liberating thing they could have possibly done for me. Maybe this brutal severance was my unexpected chance, my only chance to finally figure out who Ethan really was without her constant shadow, without their toxic influence poisoning every aspect of my life. By the time the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in fiery streaks of orange and purple, my mind was made up, resolute and clear. I wasn't going back. Not to Isabel. Not to that suffocating charade of a life. Whatever came next, whatever challenges Oak Creek held, it was mine alone to build, from the ground up. I stood uncertainly at that dusty, desolate crossroads where the first kind stranger, the truck driver, had dropped me off. The wind, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant rain, kicked up little eddies of dirt around my worn sneakers. Oak Creek was somewhere ahead, down that long straight ribbon of asphalt, but I possessed no map, no phone to guide me, not a single dime to my name. Just the increasingly grimy clothes clinging to my back and a mind swirling with chaotic, fragmented thoughts. Isabel and her posse, Olivia, Megan, Harper, had left me utterly high and dry, abandoned without a second thought. A raw, aching part of me, the part conditioned by 5 years of seeking her approval, still desperately wanted to find a way, any way, to call her. To hear her voice, even if it was laced with false concern. To demand, futilely, that she turn the damn car around and come back for me. But then the memory, sharp and painful, surfaced again. The image of her laughing, head thrown back, alongside Megan when Megan had, accidentally, knocked a full bottle of expensive craft beer all over me at the lake house party last summer. How she just shrugged dismissively, rolling her eyes, when I had quietly asked her later, pleaded with her to maybe, just maybe, stick up for me sometimes in front of her friends. "Oh, Ethan, don't be so dramatic," she'd sighed. "They're just kidding around. 5 years of that relentless erosion. 5 years of feeling like an unwelcome guest, an awkward intruder in my own marriage, in my own life. No, the realization hit with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't calling her. Not this time. Never again. With a newfound, albeit shaky, resolve, I started walking toward the distant smudge on the horizon that had to be Oak Creek. My sneakers crunched rhythmically on the loose gravel littering the shoulder of the highway. The afternoon sun was still relentlessly high, baking the parched ground, and sweat soaked through my thin t-shirt, stinging my eyes. I had no idea how far Oak Creek actually was. Miles, probably, maybe dozens of miles, but strangely, I didn't much care. Each determined step felt like a conscious choice, a deliberate severing. Like I was leaving her, leaving that whole toxic chapter behind me, one dusty footprint at a time. My mind, despite my efforts to focus on the road ahead, kept drifting inexorably back to the dusty trail's gas and go. To that sickening, heart-stopping moment when I stepped out of that grimy, flickering bathroom and saw nothing but empty, sun-bleached pavement where our car should have been. They planned it, didn't they? The thought was a cold certainty now, settling deep in my gut. Isabel, Olivia, Megan, Harper. All of them probably giggling conspiratorially in the car as they peeled out onto the highway, imagining my panic, thinking it would be utterly hilarious to just ditch me there. A cruel prank taken to a whole new level. I could almost hear Isabel's dismissive voice in my head, justifying it to the others. Oh, he'll figure something out. Ethan always does. Well, she was right about one thing. I was figuring it out now. Just not in the way she ever could have possibly expected. Another pickup truck, older this time, paint faded, rumbled past me, kicking up a cloud of dust. Almost on autopilot, my arm shot out, thumb extended hopefully, desperate for any reprieve from the oppressive heat and the endless walking. To my surprise, the truck slowed, its brakes squealing in protest. The driver, a weathered man with a scruffy gray beard poking out from under a faded flannel shirt, leaned across the passenger seat and squinted out the window at me. "Need a ride?" he asked. His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing me, clearly trying to gauge if I was trouble or just down on my luck. "Yeah, if you're heading toward Oak Creek," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady, neutral, hoping I didn't look as desperate as I felt. He nodded curtly. "Hop in. Going that way myself." Relief washed over me as I climbed gratefully into the passenger seat. The cab smelled strongly of stale oil, cheap cigarettes, and maybe a hint of old dog, but right then, it felt like the lap of luxury compared to walking under that brutal sun. "So, what's your story then?" he asked casually as we rolled steadily down the highway, the landscape blurring past the dusty windows. I hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to reveal, how much pity or judgment I could handle right now. Then I just shrugged, the effort feeling immense. "Got left behind," I said simply, staring straight ahead. "By some people I mistakenly thought I could trust." He just grunted, a low sound in his throat, like he'd heard similar tales of woe countless times before on these lonely highways. "Happens more often than you'd think out here. Folks leaving folks," he muttered, shaking his head slightly. He didn't ask any more questions, for which I was profoundly grateful. He dropped me off on the outskirts of Oak Creek, near a small cluster of low-slung, anonymous buildings and a single, tired-looking blinking traffic light marking the edge of town. "Take care now, man," he said gruffly, offering a quick nod before pulling away, leaving me standing alone once more. I stood there for a long moment, just taking it all in, the reality of my situation crashing down anew. Oak Creek. It looked like a typical small American town, a slightly weary mix of old brick storefronts with faded awnings and newer, more generic chain stores competing for space along the main drag. People bustled along the sidewalks, going about their ordinary day, completely oblivious, like nothing monumental or devastating was wrong in the world. But everything, absolutely everything, was wrong for me. No wallet, no ID, no phone, no way to prove who I even was. A wave of helplessness washed over me. I needed help, real help, and I needed it fast before despair completely consumed me. My eyes scanned the street, desperately searching for some sign, any sign of assistance. Then I spotted it, a few blocks down a side street, a plain, unassuming sign for a homeless shelter. A simple wooden cross was painted unevenly on the side of the modest, slightly run-down building. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot at the very thought. Me? Ethan? An IT professional with a decent job just days ago? Staying in a homeless shelter? The humiliation felt like a physical blow. But what other choice did I possibly have right now? None. Swallowing my pride, which felt like swallowing shards of glass, I headed towards it. Inside, the air was dim and carried the distinct, institutional smell of strong bleach overlaid with the faint aroma of stale coffee. A man seated behind a battered metal counter looked up slowly as the door creaked shut behind me. Marcus, his simple plastic name tag read. He looked to be in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, with a closely shaved head that emphasized the sharp lines of his face, and a penetrating, no-nonsense stare that seemed to see right through me. "You lost or just broke?" he asked bluntly, his voice low and gravelly, sizing me up with an unnerving lack of judgment. "Both, I guess," I admitted, the words feeling inadequate, rubbing the back of my neck self-consciously. "Got ditched, out on the highway, by some people." I couldn't bring myself to say, "Wife." No money, no phone, no ID, nothing. Marcus didn't blink, his expression unchanging. "Happens," he stated flatly, as if commenting on the weather. "You got a name?" "Yeah, Ethan," I said, deciding sticking to the truth, at least about my name, was probably the easiest course right now. He pushed a worn clipboard with a multi-page form across the counter towards me. "Fill this out as best you can," he instructed. "We'll get you a bed for the night, maybe a hot meal." His gaze met mine directly, holding a surprising amount of quiet strength. "Tomorrow, we'll start figuring out the rest." That night, I lay stiffly on a narrow, uncomfortable cot in a large, echoing room filled with the unsettling symphony of snoring, coughing, and muttering strangers. I stared numbly at the stained ceiling tiles above, my mind refusing to shut off, racing uncontrollably. Isabel's face kept flashing behind my eyelids. Her smile, her laugh, her voice, both the sweet tones she used sometimes and the cutting ones she favored with her friends. A part of me, the weak, foolish part, desperately wanted to hate her with every fiber of my being. But another, deeper part still ached with a pathetic longing for her to suddenly appear in the doorway, rush over, tell me it was all a horrible mistake, a joke gone terribly wrong. But Marcus's pragmatic words echoed in the darkness, a small anchor in the swirling chaos. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." And Marcus, true to his word, didn't mess around. The next morning, after a restless, sleep-deprived night, he sat me down in a small, cluttered office with a mug of weak, lukewarm coffee and laid out a brutally realistic plan. "First things first," he said, tapping a pen on a stack of official-looking documents. "You need proper ID to do anything around here. Get a real job, open a bank account, rent a place, anything that matters." He sighed, running a hand over his shaved head. "It takes time, paperwork, bureaucracy. It's a damn hassle, but we'll start the process today." He paused, his gaze sharp. "Meantime, though, you need cash, even just a little." I nodded silently, feeling utterly useless, overwhelmed by the sheer mountain I had to climb. "Know anywhere? Anywhere that might be hiring?" I asked hesitantly, the question sounding pathetic even to my own ears. A rare, faint smirk touched the corners of Marcus's lips. "There's a diner down the street," he said, nodding towards the window. "Brenda's Diner. Been there forever." He leaned back slightly in his chair. Owner's a tough old broad named Brenda. Doesn't take crap from anyone. He fixed me with that intense stare again. Tell her Marcus sent you. Might help. Might not. Brenda's diner was exactly as Marcus described. A squat, slightly faded little place on a corner, boasting bright red vinyl booths cracked in places and a vintage jukebox humming softly in the corner, casting colorful light. Brenda herself was stationed firmly behind the main counter, a wiry, energetic woman likely in her late 60s with intricate, faded tattoos snaking up both forearms and a voice that sounded like gravel tumbling in a cement mixer. Marcus says you need work, she rasped without even looking up from vigorously wiping down the already gleaming countertop. Yeah, ma'am, I do, I replied quickly, shifting awkwardly on my feet, feeling intensely scrutinized even though she wasn't looking at me. I'll do anything you've got. Anything at all. She finally paused her wiping and squinted at me, her sharp eyes seeming to probe right through my defenses, assessing my desperation, my willingness. Dishwasher quit yesterday morning, she stated flatly. Walked out mid-shift. She leaned slightly over the counter. Pays crap. Hours are long and mostly awful. Kitchen gets hotter than hell in the summer. Her gaze hardened. You steal one damn dime from me. You even think about it. You're dead. Got it? She jabbed a finger towards the swinging kitchen doors. Start now? I blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the abruptness, the sheer lack of ceremony, but I nodded without hesitation. There was no other option. Okay, I said, trying to inject some confidence I didn't feel into my voice. Yeah, I'm in. She grunted, seemingly satisfied, tossed a surprisingly clean apron across the counter at me, and just like that, my new life began. Minutes later, I was standing in the cramped, steamy back kitchen, vigorously scrubbing a mountain of greasy plates, the scalding hot water and harsh soap already beginning to sting my unaccustomed hands. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't my old IT job. It wasn't much at all, really. But it was something. Something tangible. Something blessedly, undeniably mine. No Isabel hovering with critiques. No Olivia, Megan, or Harper standing by, ready to laugh at my expense. Just me, the rhythmic scrape of the brush, and an endless stack of greasy dishes waiting for me. Marcus checked in a few days later, true to his word, finding me during a brief lull between the breakfast and lunch rushes. He efficiently helped me navigate the confusing first steps of filing for a replacement ID and social security card, his quiet competence a balm to my frayed nerves. You're doing all right, Ethan, he said gruffly, giving my shoulder a quick, firm clap before turning to leave. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. I wasn't entirely sure I agreed with his assessment, but I nodded anyway and kept scrubbing. I kept going. The shelter remained my temporary, noisy home. Brenda's diner became my lifeline, my purpose, my exhausting sanctuary. I didn't call Isabel. I didn't even consider trying to find a way to contact her. The break felt clean, brutally final. Every night, I collapsed onto that lumpy cot, utterly exhausted from the long hours of physical labor, but it was a different kind of tired than the soul-crushing exhaustion Isabel and her friends had inflicted. This was an honest tired, an earned tired. I was starting over, literally from absolute nothing, scraping the bottom. And for the first time since stepping out of that gas station bathroom, it felt like maybe, just maybe, I could actually make this work. Maybe I could build something new, something real, entirely on my own. I woke up abruptly on that narrow cot in the crowded shelter every single morning with the same dull ache radiating through my lower back, accompanied by the familiar, inescapable symphony of snores, coughs, and restless shifting from the other men crammed into the large room around me. It had been a couple of exhausting, relentless weeks since Isabel and her posse, Olivia, Megan, and Harper, had callously ditched me at that desolate, dusty Trails Gas and Go, and I was still struggling to fully acclimate to the harsh realities of this drastically new, stripped-down life. My days were now defined by the endless cycle of scrubbing greasy dishes and pots at Brenda's diner, sleeping fitfully on a borrowed, lumpy bed, and wearing mismatched clothes salvaged from a communal donation bin. My hands were perpetually raw and red, cracked from the constant immersion in scalding hot water and harsh industrial soap, but strangely, I didn't really mind the physical discomfort. The mindless, repetitive labor kept me relentlessly busy, a necessary distraction that prevented my mind from dwelling too much on the stinging betrayal. Marcus had been an unexpected, solid rock during this initial turbulent period, patiently helping me navigate the frustrating bureaucratic maze involved in getting a replacement ID and social security card. "Takes time, Ethan. These things always do," he'd said gruffly a few days prior, handing me yet another stack of bewildering forms to fill out. "Government wheels grind slow, but you'll get there. Just keep at it." I'd nodded numbly, profoundly grateful for his gruff, no-nonsense kindness, and resolved to keep pushing forward, one small, tedious step at a time. The diner had become the center of my small, circumscribed world now. Brenda, true to form, didn't mess around for a second. She'd bark orders rapid fire from behind the main counter, her piercingly sharp eyes seeming to catch every single mistake, every dropped fork, every slightly smudged glass. "Move faster back there, Ethan," she'd bellow, her voice cutting through the kitchen clatter. "We ain't got all damn day. Customers are waiting." Her tone was perpetually abrasive, but somehow I sensed there was no real venom behind it, just the impatience of someone running a demanding business single-handedly for decades. I started picking up double shifts whenever they were available, eager for the distraction and the extra cash, carefully piling up crumpled dollar bills in a plain white envelope I kept hidden securely under the thin mattress of my cot back at the shelter. My very first paycheck wasn't much, barely enough to cover basic necessities, but combined with my hoarded tips, it was finally enough to buy a cheap, basic prepaid phone from the convenience store down the street from the diner. I held the small, plastic device in my rough hands later that night, the packaging still shiny under the dim shelter lights, and felt an unexpected, powerful rush of something akin to genuine pride. It wasn't fancy, certainly nothing like the sleek company smartphone Isabel had ensured remained in the car, but it was mine, bought and paid for entirely with my own hard-earned money. Not Isabel's money, not anyone else's. Mine. The realization struck me with surprising force. Maybe, just maybe, I didn't actually need her anymore. Then, inevitably, the calls started. I'd only possessed the cheap phone for a single day when it buzzed insistently in the pocket of my borrowed jeans while I was elbowed deep in a sink full of greasy suds back at the diner. Annoyed at the interruption, I hastily wiped my soapy hands on my stained apron and pulled it out. Isabel's number flashed accusingly on the small, bright screen. My stomach plummeted, a cold dread washing over me. I just stood there, frozen, letting it ring and ring, watching the screen light up with her name as if the phone itself might somehow bite me, until it finally, mercifully, went to voicemail. A minute later, the notification icon popped up. "New voicemail received." I knew I shouldn't listen. I knew it was a terrible idea. But the morbid curiosity, the lingering shred of pathetic hope, was too strong to resist. I pressed play. Her voice filled the small kitchen space, carefully modulated, soft and shaky, meticulously rehearsed, like she'd spent hours practicing exactly what to say. "Ethan? Ethan, where are you?" she began, her voice trembling slightly with manufactured concern. "We waited for you back there. We really did." A pause for effect. It was just a silly joke, honey. It went too far, I know." Another pause, longer this time. "We're all so incredibly worried about you. Please, Ethan. Please just call me back. Let me know you're okay." Click. I stood there motionless, staring blankly at the perpetually running faucet over the industrial sink, the hot water swirling uselessly down the drain. Worried? Worried? They deliberately stranded me in the absolute middle of nowhere with nothing but the clothes on my back. If they'd truly waited, if they were genuinely worried, they would have come back hours ago. Days ago. The phone buzzed again, startling me. Megan this time. Her name flashed on the screen, bold and unwelcome. With a sigh, I let it go to voicemail too. Seconds later, another notification. Hesitantly, I hit play on her message. Her tone was completely different from Isabel's carefully crafted performance. Hers was all breezy, smug confidence, utterly casual, almost bored. "Hey Ethan, dude, seriously? Where'd you disappear to?" she drawled, a hint of laughter in her voice. "Come on, man, you gotta admit, looking back, it was pretty hilarious, right?" She chuckled again, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Anyway, call us back, all right?" Isabel's freaking out a little. Click. Hilarious. That single word echoed in the suddenly silent kitchen. Hilarious. My hand clenched around the cheap plastic phone, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white, the plastic creaking in protest. That's all I ever was to them. A punchline. A running gag. A pathetic story they could embellish and laugh about over expensive cocktails back at the lake house. More calls flooded in after that, relentlessly, over the next few hours. A deluge of them. Isabel again, her voice growing more insistent, tinged with annoyance now beneath the fake worry. Then Harper, her message brief and mumble, almost apologetic, but not quite. Then Olivia, cool and detached as always, suggesting maybe I'd overreacted. Then Megan again, impatient this time. They piled up, a sickening cascade of missed calls, voicemails, and eventually texts, each one a fresh wave of nausea washing over me. "Ethan, we miss you. Seriously, where did you go?" "Okay, this isn't funny anymore, Ethan. Call Isabel." I scrolled numbly through the endless list of notifications later that night, sitting on the edge of my cot, my chest tight with a confusing mix of anger and residual pain, my head spinning. Isabel's carefully chosen words kept echoing in my mind. The fake concern, the crocodile tears I could practically hear welling up in her voice, the subtle implication that somehow this was all my fault. She didn't care. Not really. None of them did. They just wanted their punching bag back. I sat there for a long time on my lumpy cot that night, the large shelter room finally settling into a restless quiet, punctuated only by the rhythmic creak of bed springs and the low, intermittent hum of the ancient heater kicking on and off. The cheap phone glowed ominously in my hand, their names and messages lighting up the small screen like accusations. I listened to Isabel's first voicemail again, then Megan's smug dismissal, then the brief, giggling message Harper had left before abruptly cutting off. My thumb hovered uncertainly over the call button next to Isabel's name. A weak, treacherous part of me, the part conditioned by years of her manipulation, still wanted to dial her number. To scream at her, unleash all the pent-up fury and hurt. To demand why. Why would she do this to me? But what, realistically, would it change? Nothing. She'd just deploy her usual tactics. Laugh it off dismissively, claim I was misunderstanding, or burst into calculated tears, and somehow twist it around until I was the one feeling guilty, like she always did. I'd spent 5 long years swallowing their casual cruelty, forcing smiles, pretending it didn't hurt, because I mistakenly thought that's what a good, supportive husband was supposed to do. No more. Never again. With a newfound, steely resolve, I went methodically through the recent call list. Isabel, Megan, Olivia, Harper. One by one, I selected each name and blocked their number. My finger trembled slightly as I pressed the final confirmation, but once it was done, a profound silence descended. The phone in my hand went completely quiet. No more buzzing. No more notifications. No more lies. No more them. I leaned back slowly against the cold, cinder block wall behind my cot, letting out a long, shuddering breath I hadn't even realized I'd been holding hostage in my chest. It felt like finally, decisively, cutting a thick, suffocating rope I'd been hopelessly tangled in for years. They couldn't reach me now. They couldn't manipulate me anymore. They didn't get to decide how this story ended. I did. Next day, I returned to Brenda's diner, feeling strangely lighter, almost numb, acting as if nothing significant had happened. I plunged my raw hands back into the steaming, greasy dishwater, letting the intense heat somehow burn away the lingering echoes of their voices, their fake concern, their casual cruelty, still trapped inside my head. Brenda, however, with her uncanny ability to notice everything, sensed something was different. "You're quiet today, Ethan," she observed during a mid-morning lull, tossing me a clean rag to wipe down the stainless steel counter. "Quieter than usual." She paused, her sharp eyes studying my face intently. "Trouble?" I just shrugged, unwilling to unpack the whole sordid mess for her, not wanting the pity or the inevitable questions. "No, just sorting some stuff out in my head," I mumbled, focusing on polishing a spot on the counter. She snorted, a loud, dismissive sound. "All right then. Long as it don't mess with my kitchen, you sort away all you damn well please." A small, genuine smirk touched my lips at that. She didn't care about my personal drama, my messy past. Just the job. Just the work getting done. In its own way, it was incredibly, refreshingly simple. Marcus stopped by again later that week, handing me a folded piece of paper with an official-looking case number scribbled on it for my ID application. "Coming along," he reported curtly. "Just gotta wait now." He clapped me briefly on the shoulder, his gaze searching. "You holding up okay?" I met his eyes and nodded, surprised to find I meant it this time. "Yeah," I said, my voice firmer than before. "Yeah, Marcus, I think I am. Better than I thought I would, actually." He gave a single, satisfied nod and left me to finish my shift. By the end of that week, I'd managed to save enough crumpled dollar bills to buy a second-hand, slightly worn denim jacket from the shelter's small donation pile. It wasn't anything fancy, smelled faintly of mothballs, but it fit reasonably well, and, more importantly, it kept the persistent evening chill off my back as I walked the few blocks back to the shelter each night after my shift. I walked back to my cot each evening, the prepaid phone remaining blessedly, wonderfully silent in my pocket, and felt tangibly lighter with every step. Isabel and her friends were gone, decisively cut out of my life like a festering infection, a bad habit finally broken. I didn't need their hollow apologies or their self-serving excuses anymore. I had work that paid me, a roof however temporary over my head, a rudimentary plan taking shape, small things, insignificant to my former life, perhaps, but they were undeniably mine. And the ache of betrayal was still there, of course, a dull throb deep in my chest, the sting still sharp when I let my guard down. But it was fading, slowly, surely, day by day. Every single greasy dish I scrubbed, every single dollar bill I carefully tucked away in that hidden envelope, felt like laying another small brick in the foundation of something new. Something they couldn't ever touch, couldn't ever taint or tear down. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I fell asleep that night without dreaming of her face, her voice, her suffocating presence. I just slept. Deeply. Soundly. Alone. I'd been working tirelessly at Brenda's diner for several months now, the relentless pace becoming a familiar rhythm, and things in my small, newly constructed world were finally starting to feel steady. Not perfect, far from it, but undeniably steady. Predictable, even. The noisy, crowded shelter was still technically my home base, but I'd diligently saved every spare penny, enough to finally scrape together the deposit and first month's rent for a tiny, slightly depressing studio apartment located above a perpetually rumbling laundromat on the edge of Oak Creek. It wasn't much to look at, honestly. Just a single, small room dominated by a lumpy, second-hand mattress on the floor, equipped with a sputtering electric hot plate for cooking, and a bathroom so minuscule I could barely turn around without bumping into the sink or the shower stall. But it was mine, all mine. No more rows of uncomfortable cots. No more listening to the symphony of strangers' snores and coughs all night long. Just a simple key clutched tightly in my pocket, and a door I could actually lock behind me. The privacy felt like an unimaginable luxury. Brenda, having witnessed me busting my tail day in and day out without complaint, had eventually, grudgingly, bumped me up from dishwasher to prep cook. It meant slightly longer hours, learning new skills under her demanding tutelage, but also, crucially, a little more cash in my pocket each week. I'd spend hours in the small, hot back kitchen, methodically chopping mountains of onions that made my eyes water, peeling endless sacks of potatoes until my fingers cramped, the steady, rhythmic thump of the knife on the cutting board keeping my hands occupied, and more importantly, my restless mind relatively quiet. It was undeniably hard, physically demanding work, often monotonous, but it felt surprisingly good. Honest. Like I was actually earning something real, tangible, building something with my own two hands. The nights, however, were still tough sometimes, especially the quiet ones. I'd lie awake on that creaky, unfamiliar mattress, staring blankly up at the intricate map of water stains blooming across the cracked ceiling, and inevitably Isabel would creep unwelcome into my thoughts. I'd see her smile, the genuine one from years ago, before things got sour. I'd hear her laugh, not the sharp, mocking one she reserved for me when her friends were around, but the softer, warmer sound she'd sometimes give me late at night, back when things were still relatively good between us, back before I somehow became her designated punching bag, the target of all her frustrations. I'd find myself wondering, against my will, what she was doing right now. If she ever missed me, even a little. If she even cared at all that I had essentially vanished off the face of the earth. The loneliness, when it hit, struck hard and unexpectedly, a heavy, cold weight settling deep in my chest, a suffocating blanket that sometimes felt impossible to shake off. But then, inevitably, morning would come. The first rays of sunlight would filter weakly through the dusty window pane, and I'd drag my aching body out of bed, pull on my worn jacket, and head out into the crisp morning air towards the welcoming, greasy spoon smell of Brenda's diner. And the relief would wash over me anew. No palpable fear of her judgment shadowing my steps. No bracing myself for the inevitable cruel jabs disguised as banter from Olivia or Megan or Harper. Just me, Ethan, free to simply breathe, free to just be. One particularly long, slow night, after an exhausting double shift, I found myself idly messing around with my cheap prepaid phone back in my tiny apartment, feeling bored, restless, and dangerously reflective. I deliberately kept it simple until now. No contacts saved, no social media apps downloaded, determinedly severing all ties to my past life. But tonight, a nagging, persistent curiosity, a weakness I despised in myself, got the better of me. Using the diner's spotty Wi-Fi, I quickly created a completely fake, anonymous social media profile. Just a random generic name, no photo, no personal details whatsoever. And then, hesitantly, typed her name into the search bar. Isabel's profile popped up instantly, still set to public, still meticulously curated to project her flawless, enviable little life to the world. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the photos. There were pictures from that very lake house trip, the one I'd been forced to endure just before she abandoned me. Her and Megan posing arm in arm by the shimmering water, broad smiles plastered on their faces. Olivia grinning slyly, holding up a cocktail, looking like the cat that got the cream. Harper lurking in the background, offering her usual vague smile. Then I saw it. A post specifically about me. My blood ran cold. It was an old photo, one I vaguely remembered someone taking years ago, back when we were still relatively happy, the two of us smiling foolishly at some long-forgotten picnic. And her caption, Her caption hit me like a physical slap across the face. Missing my love, my Ethan, so much today. It read, dripping with manufactured sentimentality. Wherever he is, I pray he finds his way back home to me soon. My heart aches. I stared at the screen, my thumb frozen, hovering uselessly above the image. My breath caught in my throat. Missing me? Praying I'd find my way back? She hadn't even bothered to circle back to the gas station. She hadn't called the police to report me missing. I would have heard by now if she had. She'd just driven off, laughing probably, and left me stranded, left me to rot in the middle of nowhere without a phone, wallet, or a single dollar. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped my lips right there in that dingy, lonely apartment, the sound bouncing strangely off the bare, peeling walls. It was so utterly fake. So perfectly, predictably Isabel. Always expertly spinning the narrative, effortlessly turning herself into the blameless victim, the heartbroken wife pining for her lost husband. Making it seem like I'd simply wandered off on my own volition, instead of being deliberately, cruelly abandoned by her and her cackling friends. My eyes scanned numbly through the comments below the post. Megan chiming in with, "He'll turn up, Izzy, don't worry. He always does." Harper adding a string of supportive heart emojis, sending you so many hugs. "Stay strong." Olivia simply writing, "Thinking of you." My stomach turned violently. The calculated insincerity of it all was suffocating. They were all in on it, playing their parts perfectly in this twisted little drama, painting me as the irresponsible one, the one who had inexplicably disappeared, leaving poor Isabel distraught. Furious, I clicked off the app and tossed the phone onto the lumpy mattress as if it were contaminated. I ran both hands roughly through my hair, pacing the tiny confines of the room like a caged animal. She hadn't changed one single bit. None of them had. They were still the same selfish, manipulative people they'd always been. But I had changed. I wasn't that smiling, naive guy in that old picnic photo anymore. The one who would just grin and bear it, swallowing the insults, absorbing the mockery, while they systematically tore me down piece by piece. I was someone else now. Someone stronger. Someone harder. Someone they didn't know at all. Someone they would never get the chance to know. The next day at the diner, I was noticeably quieter than usual, still chewing on the bitter cud of what I'd seen online, the blatant hypocrisy of it all churning in my gut. Brenda, naturally, noticed immediately. She always did. "You look like someone just kicked your damn dog, Ethan," she remarked bluntly, sliding a complimentary plate of crispy French fries my way during a rare slow moment in the late afternoon. I just shrugged listlessly, picking half-heartedly at a fry. "Nat, just thinking too much, I guess," I mumbled evasively. She raised a skeptical eyebrow, crossing her tattooed arms firmly over her chest. "Thinking too much about what?" she pressed, her gaze unwavering. "That no good ex of yours?" I froze, genuinely surprised she'd guessed it so accurately. I'd never explicitly told her the whole ugly story, just offered vague, fragmented bits and pieces over the months about needing a fresh start. "Yeah," I admitted reluctantly, feeling a flush creep up my neck. "Saw something. Something she posted online." I hesitated, then added bitterly, "She's acting like she's the one who got hurt in all this. Like she's the victim." Brenda snorted loudly, a sharp, derisive sound that cut through the diner's quiet hum. "Figures. Sounds like a real piece of work, that one," she declared matter-of-factly. She leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Good riddance to bad rubbish, kid. You're better off." I met her gaze and managed a small, grateful smile. She was absolutely right. Good riddance. Work kept me grounded in the following weeks. I threw myself into it with renewed intensity. I meticulously diced vegetables until my fingers were numb, willingly jumped onto the grill to flip burgers whenever the main cook needed a hand during the rush, wiped down counters until they gleamed. Anything, absolutely anything, to keep my body moving, and my mind occupied, pushing away the lingering ghosts of the past. The diner had developed its own cast of regulars by now, friendly local folks who'd offer me a familiar nod or occasionally leave a couple of extra bucks specifically for me on the table when they left. And that felt unexpectedly good. Solid. Like maybe, just maybe, I was slowly becoming part of something real here, part of this small community. My hands were calloused now, rough and strong. My arms, once accustomed to tapping keyboards, were noticeably stronger from constantly hauling heavy crates of produce and relentlessly scrubbing greasy pans. I'd catch my reflection sometimes in the diner's large glass front door as I wiped it down at closing time. Tired eyes, perpetually messy hair clinging to my forehead, maybe a smudge of grease on my cheek. But what I saw looking back was a guy who was actually making it, somehow, surviving and even starting to build something, one long, exhausting day at a time. Isabel's manipulative social media post gradually faded from the forefront of my mind, replaced by the comforting daily rhythm of clattering plates, sizzling bacon, and Brenda's gruff voice shouting out orders across the busy kitchen. I stopped checking her profile after that one painful time. There was simply no need. Whatever lies she was spinning, whatever fabricated story she was telling the world, whatever pity party she was throwing for herself, it didn't matter anymore. Not really. It couldn't touch me here. I had my tiny studio, my demanding but steady job, my slowly growing savings, my quiet, solitary life. Small, yes, undeniably small compared to what I'd had before, but it was mine, and it was slowly, steadily growing. The loneliness still paid unwelcome visits, of course, especially on quiet nights when the rhythmic hum and rattle of the washing machines in the laundromat downstairs seemed to amplify the silence in my small room. But it wasn't as sharp anymore, not as crippling as it had been in those first few weeks. It was becoming more like a dull ache, a familiar shadow I was learning to live with. I'd wake up each morning to the faint, clean smell of laundry detergent drifting up through the floorboards, pull on my sturdy work boots, and head out into the cool, pre-dawn air. And the relief was always immediate. No one was waiting around the corner to mock me. No one was poised to roll their eyes dismissively at my every word or action. I could just be Ethan. Plain, simple, unremarkable Ethan, the prep cook at Brenda's diner. And somehow, astonishingly, that felt like enough. More than enough, actually. For the first time in what felt like countless years, I finally felt like I was standing on solid, stable ground, not constantly sinking in the treacherous quicksand of Isabel's making. Freedom, I was discovering, wasn't loud or flashy or dramatic. It wasn't about revenge or grand pronouncements. It was this: my own key in my pocket, my own paycheck earned through honest sweat, my own choices, big or small, shaping my own days. And I wasn't ever giving it back. Not for anything. Not for anyone. I'd been living in the small studio above the laundromat for a good while now, maybe 6 months or so, slowly settling into a predictable, solitary routine that finally felt completely, undeniably mine. Work long hours at Brenda's diner, meticulously save every spare dollar I could, retreat back to sleep in my own quiet, albeit cramped, space. The days often blurred together in a monotonous cycle of chopping, scrubbing, and sleeping, but they were good days overall. Steady days. Mine. Then, one Tuesday morning, she walked in. Clara! She started coming into Brenda's diner fairly regularly, maybe twice a week, always choosing the same worn vinyl booth tucked away by the front window, always arriving with a formidable stack of thick textbooks and a determined-looking pen clutched in her hand. She was clearly a student, likely a med student at Oak Creek University, judging by the complex diagrams in her books and the way she'd occasionally mutter unfamiliar medical terms under her breath while furiously scribbling notes onto a legal pad. Her order never varied, not once. A Denver omelet, specifically requesting no tomatoes, with a side of extra crispy hash browns, and endless cups of black coffee. and she'd barely even glance up from her studies when I brought her food over, just offer a quick, distracted nod. I found myself watching her sometimes, discreetly from behind the counter, faintly amused by her intense focus. The way she'd get so completely lost in her studying that her fork, loaded with eggs, would sometimes hover forgotten halfway to her mouth for a full minute before she seemed to remember she was actually eating. Looking back, I don't know exactly why I started messing with her, subtly testing her observational skills. Maybe I was just profoundly bored with the predictable routine. Maybe, after months of keeping my head down and avoiding unnecessary interactions, I just wanted to see if I could elicit some kind of reaction, crack that serious facade, maybe even provoke a smile. So, I started discreetly swapping out my official Ethan name tag with random, ridiculous names I'd hastily scribble onto scraps of paper. Bob, one day; Steve, the next; Carl, the week after that, just to see if she, the hyper-focused med student, would ever actually notice the discrepancy. She didn't, at first. Far too buried in her dense textbooks about anatomy or pharmacology or whatever complex subject demanded her full attention. But then one slow Thursday morning, I walked over to her usual booth to refill her coffee, proudly sporting a name tag that boldly proclaimed Rusty, and she finally looked up properly. Her sharp, intelligent eyes narrowed slightly, flicking pointedly down to the absurd name tag pinned crookedly to my apron, then deliberately back up to my face. A tiny frown creased her brow. "Your name tag is wrong," she stated quietly but firmly, her tone matter of fact, almost like she was delivering a diagnosis. A wide grin spread across my face before I could stop it, genuinely caught off guard by her directness. I felt a ridiculous thrill at having finally gotten a reaction. "Is it?" I shot back playfully, leaning slightly on the back of the opposite booth, even though we both knew damn well it was. A small, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corners of her lips for just a fleeting second. Then, just as quickly, she dropped her gaze back to her notes, dismissing me. But that was it. That brief, unexpected exchange. Our first real moment of genuine interaction, however small. And for some reason, it stuck with me long after she'd paid her bill and left. Work at the diner continued to keep me incredibly busy, the days packed with chopping, grilling, and cleaning. But Clara somehow became the unexpected bright spot, the highlight of my otherwise monotonous week. She'd reliably show up, slide into her usual booth, order her standard Denver omelet, no tomatoes, extra coffee, and I'd find myself inventing increasingly flimsy excuses to swing by her table more often than strictly necessary. Refill her coffee mug for the 10th time, clear away her empty plate the second she finished, ask with feigned concern if she needed anything else, maybe another side of hash browns. She'd usually just nod distractedly or mumble a polite, "No, thank you," her focus already drifting back to her textbooks. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch that fleeting smirk again, lingering in my head like a silent, intriguing challenge. One particularly dreary Tuesday, she came in looking noticeably frazzled, her usually neat brown hair slightly messy, dark circles under her eyes, and her stack of books seeming even heavier and more intimidating than usual. "Rough night?" I asked casually, setting her steaming coffee mug down gently beside her elbow. She let out a long, weary sigh, rubbing her tired eyes with the heels of her hands. "Exams," she mumbled, her voice thick with exhaustion. "Biochemistry is kicking my butt." She managed a weak smile. "Pretty sure I haven't actually slept in about 2 days straight." I nodded sympathetically, sensing she didn't want to elaborate, so I didn't push it. But later, when I brought her omelet over, I discreetly slipped an extra large, perfectly golden brown hash brown onto her plate when she wasn't looking. A small, silent gesture of solidarity. She noticed immediately, of course. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked down at the overloaded plate, then glanced up at me, a spark of amusement finally lighting up her tired eyes. "You're sneaky, Ethan," she said, her voice holding a hint of laughter this time. She'd apparently noticed my real name tag eventually. I just shrugged nonchalantly, feeling ridiculously pleased with myself. Gotta keep your energy levels up somehow for all that studying, I replied smoothly. Our first real date wasn't even remotely planned. It just sort of happened. She came into the diner one Friday evening, looking surprisingly dressed up, nice jeans and a pretty blue top, a stark contrast to her usual comfy study sweatshirt and leggings. She looked flustered and annoyed. She explained, half muttering to herself as I wiped down the counter nearby, that her study group friends had abruptly bailed on a dinner reservation they had at some relatively fancy new pizza place across town. I made the reservation weeks ago, she lamented, clearly frustrated. And I'm definitely not wasting it. She sighed dramatically, then suddenly looked directly at me, a hopeful, slightly mischievous glint in her eyes. Hey, Ethan, you free tonight? I was just finishing wiping down the counter, my long shift blessedly almost over, and Brenda, inevitably, was hovering within earshot, polishing silverware behind the register. Before I could even formulate a response, Brenda barked loudly, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. Go on, kid, get out of here, she commanded. You're no damn used to me standing around here moping like a lovesick puppy anyway. So, slightly stunned but grinning, I went. We ended up splitting a large pepperoni and mushroom pizza and sharing a pitcher of cheap domestic beer, so much for soda, and she laughed. A genuine, unrestrained laugh that crinkled the corners of her eyes when I sheepishly confessed the whole elaborate name tag prank I'd been pulling on her for weeks. I knew it probably wasn't really Rusty, she admitted, her eyes sparkling under the dim restaurant lights. You definitely don't look like a Rusty. We talked for hours that night, easily, naturally, about the crushing stress of med school exams, about the quirky characters and daily grind of my diner gig, about random, dumb stuff like our favorite childhood movies and worst first date stories. It felt surprisingly easy, completely natural, almost like we'd somehow known each other for much longer than just a few months of brief diner interactions. 6 months after that impromptu pizza date, she moved into my tiny studio apartment above the laundromat. It was undeniably cramped, bordering on claustrophobic. Her massive stacks of medical textbooks seemed to instantly take up nearly half the available floor space, and we constantly tripped over each other trying to navigate the minuscule kitchen area while attempting to make dinner together on that single, temperamental hot plate. But I honestly didn't care one bit. Having her there filled a void I hadn't fully acknowledged existed. She'd often study late into the night, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating her focused face while I slept nearby, and sometimes I'd wake up in the pre-dawn hours to hear her quietly muttering complex anatomical terms or drug interactions in her sleep. It was strangely, incredibly comforting. A year after that, pooling our meager savings, we finally managed to rent a slightly bigger, much nicer place together. A real one-bedroom apartment with a separate kitchen that actually had a working oven and a comfortable, second-hand couch that didn't smell faintly of bleach and regret. Clara was fundamentally different from Isabel in almost every conceivable way. She didn't mock me ever. She didn't subtly undermine my confidence or make me feel small and inadequate. On the contrary, whenever I'd occasionally expressed doubt about myself or my future, wrestling with the lingering insecurities Isabel had so expertly instilled, Clara would just calmly look me in the eye and say, with unshakable conviction, Ethan, you've absolutely got this. And somehow, hearing it from her, I'd actually start to believe it myself. We fell into an easy domestic rhythm. We'd cook simple dinners together, binge watch old sci-fi TV shows, engage in playful arguments over whose turn it was to take out the trash or who left the dirty dishes sitting in the sink. It was simple, ordinary, sometimes messy, but it felt real. It felt like ours. Meanwhile, Isabel, predictably, wouldn't completely let go. She'd somehow managed to track down my new email address, probably through some old online account or a forgotten bill forwarded from our previous address. She started sending sporadic emails. The first one arrived unexpectedly a few weeks after Clara had officially moved in with me, popping up ominously on my phone screen while I was busy chopping bell peppers for the dinner rush back at Brenda's. Ethan, it began, deceptively casual. I just, I just really want to know that you're okay. That's all. A pause seemed implied even in text. I miss you terribly. Another pause. We all do. I stared numbly at the words on the screen, my knife hovering motionless over the bright green pepper. Miss me? We all do? She'd abandoned me at a desolate gas station with absolutely nothing, presumably laughed about it with her friends, spun manipulative stories online, and now, months later, she suddenly missed me? My stomach clenched with familiar anger. I deleted the email immediately without replying, stabbing the delete button with unnecessary force. More emails followed sporadically after that, some short and seemingly innocuous, others long and rambling, filled with self-pity and veiled accusations, all of them dripping with that cloying, insincere sweetness she had always mastered so expertly. Ethan, I know I messed up. I really do. Can we please just talk? Please? I ran into your grandmother at the store yesterday. She's so worried about you. She asked me to tell you to call her. The mention of my grandma was a particularly low blow. I'd read each message, feel that old, familiar ache flare up briefly in my chest, that flicker of guilt she was so adept at igniting, and then I'd resolutely hit delete. Clara caught me frowning at my phone one evening after a particularly passive-aggressive email from Isabel arrived. Everything okay? She asked gently, noticing my expression. Who keeps emailing you? Nobody important. I lied quickly, forcing a casual smile, and thankfully, she didn't push it further. She trusted me. She didn't need to interrogate me or monitor my communications. The contrast with Isabel was stark and profoundly comforting. I wasn't going back. Not ever. Life with Clara was good. Immeasurably better, richer, and more real than I had ever thought I deserved after everything that had happened. The diner was humming along steadily. My hands were skilled and capable now, my confidence slowly rebuilding, and Isabel's manipulative emails were just annoying background noise, easily ignored, easily deleted. I had built something new here in Oak Creek, something solid, something entirely my own. And every single day spent with Clara, every shared meal, every quiet conversation, every easy laugh, proved it unequivocally. She'd tease me mercilessly about my occasionally burnt attempts at cooking fancy meals. I'd laugh heartily at her truly terrible, off-key singing in the shower, and we'd often fall asleep tangled together comfortably on that beloved second-hand couch, the TV murmuring softly in the background. Isabel could write all the manipulative emails she wanted. She could play the victim to her heart's content online. It didn't matter anymore. I didn't owe her a damn thing. Not an explanation, not an apology, not even a response. My world, my real world, was right here now in this small apartment with Clara, and I wasn't letting go of it for anything or anyone. I stood sweating in the familiar heat of the kitchen at Brenda's diner, the original one, deftly flipping a sizzling burger on the flat-top grill. The air hung thick with the comforting, greasy aroma of bacon and onions, and the rhythmic sizzle filled the space as tiny droplets of hot grease popped harmlessly against my sturdy apron. Things had been undeniably good lately. Better than just good, actually. Remarkably, unexpectedly good. Clara and I were comfortably settled into our new, larger apartment, a significant and welcome step up from the cramped, noisy studio above the laundromat. This place boasted a real bedroom with a door that closed, a reliable stove that didn't threaten to smoke us out every time we used it, and a big picture window in the living room that actually let in cheerful afternoon sunlight. Life felt surprisingly solid, stable, almost normal. Like I'd finally, definitively, climbed all the way out of the deep, dark hole Isabel and her friends had so carelessly dug for me and left me in. Work was steady and increasingly rewarding too. I'd been working tirelessly at the diner long enough now that Brenda seemed to actually trust me with more significant responsibilities than just washing dishes and prepping vegetables. She'd started genuinely leaning on me, relying on my judgment, barking her orders a little less frequently, and even offering rare, almost imperceptible nods of approval when I managed to get things done right without needing constant supervision. That particular Tuesday afternoon, though, during an unusual slow stretch between the lunch and dinner rushes, she called me over to the main counter, wiping her hands methodically on a clean rag, her sharp, intelligent eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that immediately put me on alert. She looked like she had something significant, something important, to say. "Ethan," she began, her voice unusually serious, lacking its typical rasp. She paused, then added, almost grudgingly, "You're not half bad at this whole diner racket, you know that?" A surprised smirk tugged at my lips, assuming she was just setting me up for one of her usual sarcastic jokes, but her face remained completely serious, her expression uncharacteristically earnest. "I'm thinking about opening a second spot," she continued, leaning slightly forward. "Across town, near the highway." She gestured vaguely with her rag. "Smaller joint, maybe more focused on breakfast and lunch for the truckers. But it'll be mine." She paused again, her gaze unwavering. "I'm gonna need someone solid to run it for me. Someone I can trust not to screw it up or rob me blind." Her eyes bore into mine. "You in?" I froze completely, the greasy spatula still clutched tightly in my hand, the forgotten burger sizzling aggressively on the grill behind me. My mind struggled to process her words. "Me? Run a diner? Her diner?" I'd graduated from scrubbing plates to prepping food and occasionally helping on the line, sure, but actually managing a whole place? Overseeing staff, ordering supplies, handling the finances? The responsibility felt immense, terrifying. Are, are you serious, Brenda?" I stammered, my voice coming out rougher, more incredulous than I intended. She snorted dismissively, back to her usual self. "Do I look like I'm damn kidding, Ethan?" she retorted sharply. "You've got the chops for it. I've been watching you." She ticked off points on her fingers. "You work hard. You don't steal. Far as I can tell. You don't whine about every little thing like half the idiots I hire." Her gaze hardened again. "So? Yes or no? Don't have all day." My head spun dizzily. Just a year or so ago, I'd been penniless, homeless, stranded at a desolate gas station with absolutely nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart full of despair. And now Brenda was offering me this incredible opportunity, this chance. A paranoid part of me, the part forever scarred by Isabel's manipulations, almost screamed no immediately, convinced it had to be some kind of elaborate trick, some cruel prank waiting to spring, just like Isabel's endless games. But Brenda just stood there, waiting patiently, her expression unreadable. That night, I sat numbly on our comfortable second-hand couch, Clara's warm leg resting casually against mine, staring blankly at the flickering television screen without really registering what was playing. Clara came home late from a long study session at the OCU library, dropping her heavy backpack overflowing with books by the door with a weary sigh. She immediately noticed my preoccupied state as she kicked off her shoes. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, her voice soft with concern, coming over to sit beside me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her then, hesitantly, about Brenda's unexpected offer, my voice low and uncertain, almost as if saying the words out loud might somehow jinx it, make it disappear. She wants me to run her new diner," I explained, still struggling to fully believe it myself. "Me, in charge of everything." Clara plopped down close beside me on the couch, her knee brushing reassuringly against mine. She studied my face intently for a moment. "Okay," she said slowly. "And you're actually thinking about turning her down? Why?" She knew me too well already, could always read me like an open book. I shrugged helplessly, rubbing the back of my tense neck. "I don't know, Clara. I admitted honestly. It's a huge step. What if I screw it all up? What if I'm not ready? What if I fail? The old insecurities, deeply ingrained, surfaced quickly. She reached over and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly firm, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Ethan," she said softly, but with absolute conviction, "you're practically running half that place already whenever Brenda steps out. I see you." She squeezed my hand. "You're helping her with inventory, dealing with suppliers, fixing the coffee machine when it breaks, calming down difficult customers when she's yelling at someone else in the back." She smiled gently. "This is just making it official, giving you the title you already deserve." Her eyes met mine, full of confidence in me. "You've totally got this. Stop doubting yourself." Her simple, unwavering words, her absolute faith in me, hit me hard, like a gentle but firm shove forward that I hadn't realized I desperately needed. She didn't doubt me. Not for a single second. And that feeling, being truly believed in, felt incredibly new, strangely foreign, and overwhelmingly good. Isabel would have laughed scornfully, undoubtedly said something cutting like, "You? A boss? Seriously, Ethan? Don't make me laugh." And Olivia and Megan would have eagerly piled on with more mocking comments. But Clara just looked at me, her expression calm, steady, and completely sure. And in that moment, drawing strength from her belief, I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said, my voice firmer now. "Okay, I'll do it." She smiled then, that small, quiet smile I loved so much, the one that always reached her eyes, and leaned her head comfortably against my shoulder. "Good," she whispered. "I knew you would." She nudged me playfully. "Now, stop moping around looking terrified. We've got dinner to make and dishes to do." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh this time, feeling the heavy weight of anxiety lift slightly from my chest. We went into the kitchen and washed the accumulated dinner plates together, side by side, her humming some cheerful, slightly off-key pop song while I playfully splashed dishwater at her. The very next day, I walked into the diner with a newfound sense of purpose and told Brenda yes, I would take the job. She just grunted, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes, like she'd expected it all along, and promptly handed me a brand new set of keys attached to a simple metal ring. "All right then," she said gruffly. "Don't burn the damn place down on your first week." Then she turned abruptly back to her task of counting the previous day's cash receipts, the conversation apparently over. The new diner, Brenda's too as the sign would eventually read, was indeed a modest, hole-in-the-wall kind of spot, located in a slightly rundown strip mall closer to the interstate. Maybe 10 small tables, a short formica counter, and a kitchen barely big enough for two people to work in without constantly bumping into each other. But it was going to be mine. Mine to run. Mine to shape. I started the following Monday, immersing myself completely in the whirlwind of setting up waitress schedules, figuring out the complex ordering systems for food and supplies, interviewing potential cooks, and jumping onto the grill myself whenever the line got slammed during the chaotic opening week. It was pure, unadulterated chaos at first. New waitresses constantly forgetting orders, me accidentally burning an entire batch of expensive bacon during the morning rush, the ancient dishwasher flooding the kitchen floor. But somehow, slowly, painstakingly, I figured it out. We figured it out. Clara was right. I had already been doing most of this stuff back at the original Brenda's, just without the official title, without the ultimate responsibility resting squarely on my shoulders. Gradually, the new place started to find its rhythm, started to hum with its own energy. Regular customers began trickling in. Truckers grateful for a hot meal close to the highway, local workers from nearby businesses, curious townspeople. Even Brenda herself stopped by unannounced one afternoon, surveying the busy dining room with a critical eye before finally giving a single, curt nod that felt like the highest praise imaginable. "Not bad, kid," she muttered before turning and leaving. "Not too damn bad at all." And in that moment, I felt taller, prouder, more capable than I had in years. Then, inevitably, another email from Isabel arrived. I was sitting in the tiny back office of the new diner late one evening trying to reconcile the day's receipts on my phone when the notification popped up, casting a sudden shadow over my hard-won sense of accomplishment. Ethan, it read, the tone deceptively sweet. I hope this email finds you well. Your grandmother has been asking about you constantly. She's very worried. A familiar twist of guilt tightened in my gut. Grandma. She'd always been incredibly kind and sweet to me, always remembering my birthday, sending encouraging cards even long after Isabel and I were married, despite Isabel's subtle attempts to distance me from my family. But Isabel bringing her up now? Mentioning her worry? It felt calculated, manipulative. A cheap shot designed specifically to exploit my affection for my grandmother, a blatant hook intended to reel me back into her toxic orbit. I could vividly picture her typing the message, perhaps with crocodile tears glistening in her eyes, expertly crafting the words to maximize my guilt, just like she always used to do. My thumb hovered over the delete button. I hesitated for only a second, then slammed it down harder than necessary. Deleted. Gone. She didn't get to use my grandma against me. Not now. Not after everything she'd done. I hadn't called home in a while, true, consumed by the demands of my new life, but I would fix that myself on my own terms. Not through her manipulative interference. I threw myself back into the relentless demands of running the diner after that, determinedly keeping my hands and mind constantly busy so my thoughts wouldn't have a chance to wander back to her, back to the past. The new place was really starting to pick up steam now. More truckers were stopping by regularly, their familiar rigs filling the parking lot during peak hours. Local folks started chatting me up casually, asking about the daily specials, treating me like I actually belonged here, like I was one of them now. I'd come home exhausted each night to find Clara diligently studying at our small kitchen table, her textbooks spread out like a conquering army, and she'd always look up and ask gently how my day went. Good, I'd say, sinking gratefully onto the couch. Really good, actually. And I'd mean it, truly mean it, most of the time. We'd cook simple dinners together, nothing fancy, just pasta or burgers or tacos, and talk comfortably about her challenging classes at OCU, my chaotic day managing the diner, our hopes and plans for the future. Isabel's emails kept coming sporadically, relentlessly piling up unread in my trash folder, but I steadfastly refused to open them anymore. She was becoming a ghost, a persistent but increasingly faint shadow from a past life that I could actively choose to ignore. My real life, my present, and my future was right here, in Oak Creek. The diner's Clara, the satisfying weight of the keys jingling in my pocket at the end of a long day. I had been abandoned once, left completely adrift to figure things out on my own, and somehow, against all odds, I had. Now I was busy building something better, something stronger, something entirely untouchable by them. Every night, when I locked up the diner, drove home to Clara, and finally collapsed into bed, I felt like a man who had finally, truly, found his footing in the world. Solid ground beneath my feet at last. I was standing in the bustling kitchen of my third diner, the newest one situated strategically on the busy edge of Oak Creek, expertly flipping a row of perfectly golden eggs on the hot grill when my phone buzzed insistently in my apron pocket. The chaotic morning rush was in absolute full swing. Truckers bellowing good-naturedly for more coffee refills, waitresses darting skillfully between crowded tables balancing overloaded trays, the air thick with the sounds and smells of breakfast. And I almost ignored the vibration, completely immersed in the controlled chaos. 15 years. An entire decade and a half had somehow slipped by since that fateful day at the dusty trails gas and go, turning me, gradually but irrevocably, into a different man entirely. Clara and I were happily married now, the proud, often exhausted parents of two energetic kids who seemed dedicated to tearing up our comfortable but perpetually messy house. My 3 diner locations, Brenda having eventually sold me the original 2 outright before retiring to Florida, kept me constantly busy, challenged, and surprisingly fulfilled. Life was good, chaotic, loud, demanding, undoubtedly full. Absolutely nothing like the hollow, empty shell of an existence I'd endured back when Isabel left me stranded and alone. With a practiced movement, I wiped my greasy hands on my apron, pulled out my phone, and glanced down at the screen. My stomach did a sudden, unpleasant little flip. It was a notification from ProLink, the professional networking site I barely used. Someone viewed your ProLink profile 52 times today. 52 times? I didn't use ProLink much at all, just maintained a basic, rarely updated page listing my name, the diners, and a slightly blurry headshot Clara had forced me to take years ago for some forgotten reason. But 52 views? In a single day? That wasn't just unusual. That was obsessive, slightly unnerving. My thumb hesitated for a second before I tapped the notification open, the constant hiss and sizzle of the grill providing a familiar background soundtrack. And there she was, Isabel. Her name, linked to some generic-sounding consulting firm called Apex Consulting I didn't recognize and didn't care about, hit me like an unexpected splash of ice-cold water right there on the screen. 52 views. Today alone. She'd been meticulously digging through the sparse details of my current life, clicking, scrolling, viewing, over and over and over again. Why? I carefully set the phone down on the stainless steel prep counter, my hands gripping the cool edge, trying consciously to steady myself, forcing deep breaths. 15 years. 15 years of silence. 15 years of building a completely separate existence. And now she was back. Suddenly, inexplicably back, creeping into my periphery like a persistent, unwelcome shadow I thought I'd finally, completely shaken off years ago. My hands moved automatically, flipping the eggs with practiced ease, barely watching them cook, my mind suddenly racing, thrown completely off kilter. What the hell did she want now? After all this time? Why surface now? I'd blocked her emails, her phone numbers, every possible avenue of contact years and years ago. I'd deliberately ignored her pathetic attempts at guilt trips relayed through reluctant mutual acquaintances. I'd painstakingly built a whole new world, a whole new life, entirely without her. And yet, here she was again, poking around the edges, silently but persistently watching me from the digital distance. The diner smelled comfortingly of sizzling bacon, sweet syrup, and strong coffee. The familiar clatter of plates and the murmur of customer conversations usually kept me grounded, focused. But now, they barely registered. I expertly plated the perfectly cooked eggs, slid them onto the pass-through counter for a waiting waitress, and tried desperately to force my attention back to the immediate demands of the kitchen. More coffee needed brewing. Hash browns were dangerously close to burning on the back burner. But Isabel's name, Isabel's sudden reappearance, stuck stubbornly in my mind like a burr under a saddle. I couldn't shake the unsettling image of her sitting somewhere, maybe in a sterile office cubicle at Apex Consulting, maybe alone in a quiet apartment, repeatedly clicking on my outdated ProLink profile, obsessively scanning the meager details, seeing the names of the diners, maybe even noting the old prep cook job at Brenda's I'd listed years ago as my first step back into the working world. Did she know about Clara? Did she know about the kids? My profile was deliberately vague, minimal. I hadn't posted personal updates or photos, just enough basic professional information to look reasonably legitimate. But 52 views. That level of intense scrutiny suggested she was looking hard, searching for something specific. What? I wiped my forehead with the back of my arm, the kitchen heat suddenly feeling oppressive, sweat mixing uncomfortably with the ambient grease in the air. I impulsively grabbed my phone again, pulled up the ProLink notification, and stared at her profile picture thumbnail. Isabel. Noticeably older now, of course, lines etched around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. her hair cut short in a severe, unflattering style. A tight, forced smile plastered on her face in her professional headshot. Consultant at Apex Consulting, the brief bio stated. I didn't read any further. I didn't want to know any more about her life, her career, her choices. Quickly, I stepped into the small, cramped back storeroom, the air thick with the scent of dry flour and canned tomatoes, and leaned heavily against the cool metal shelving. My heart was thumping erratically against my ribs, far too fast, like I'd just sprinted a mile instead of just walking 10 feet. 15 years. 2 amazing kids. A wonderful, supportive wife. A successful, thriving business built from absolutely nothing. And yet, she, Isabel, could still rattle me this profoundly with just a few clicks on a website. I hated that vulnerability. Hated that she still held even that tiny sliver of power over my emotions. I'd worked so damn hard, for so damn long, to bury her memory deep, to forget the humiliation of the gas station, the sting of her friend's laughter, the crushing way she'd consistently made me feel like absolute, worthless nothing. And now she was back. Not even saying anything directly, just watching, lurking in the digital shadows. Was she jealous of my success? Was she angry? Or worse, was she desperate? I ran my hands agitatedly through my already messy hair, pacing the tiny, cramped space between shelves piled high with industrial-sized bags of sugar and coffee beans. A reckless part of me, fueled by sudden anger, wanted to send her a curt message right then and there. What the hell is your deal, Isabel? What do you want? But I stopped myself just in time. No, that's exactly what she'd want. Me reaching out first. Me showing I was affected. Giving her that crack, that opening, to try and slither her way back into my life, back into my head. Absolutely not. Taking another deep, calming breath, I pushed open the storeroom door and went resolutely back out to the grill, forcing myself back into the familiar rhythm of the breakfast rush. Cooking, pouring coffee, wiping down tables myself when the waitresses got swamped, keeping my hands constantly busy, my mind focused on the immediate task at hand. The regulars nodded their usual greetings. Some guy at the counter asked for extra ketchup for his fries. The phone rang with a takeout order, and I just kept moving, kept my voice steady, kept my expression neutral. She was out there, somewhere, watching, maybe planning something. But she was there, and I was here, in the heart of the life I had built for myself. Those 52 views felt like an incessant, annoying itch I couldn't quite scratch, lurking just beneath the surface of my composure. But I wouldn't let her see me sweat. I didn't tell Clara about the ProLink notification when I finally got home that evening, exhausted but wired. She was already on the couch, patiently folding a mountain of clean laundry, while the familiar sounds of our kids yelling playfully about some video game drifted down from upstairs. "Busy day, honey?" she asked, glancing up with a warm smile as I walked in. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a casual smile in return, bending down to kiss her forehead. "You know, same old, same old." She didn't push for more details, just handed me a pile of mismatched socks to sort, her easy trust in me a stark contrast to Isabel's constant suspicion and interrogation. I sat down beside her, folding socks automatically, pretending everything was perfectly normal, while my mind secretly wrestled with the implications of Isabel's sudden reappearance. The house felt warm, safe, smelled deliciously like dinner. Clara's famous chicken and rice casserole, a family favorite, and soon the kids tumbled downstairs, loudly begging for dessert before starting their homework. I laughed, ruffled their hair, said no to more cookies, and felt blessedly, wonderfully normal for a precious few minutes. But Isabel lingered, an unwelcome ghost at the edge of my thoughts, a cold premonition I couldn't quite shake. I deliberately didn't check ProLink again that night, or the next day. I didn't need to see if she'd looked 50 more times or 100 more times. 52 was more than enough to signal something. I helped Clara with the dinner dishes later, her hip bumping gently against mine as we stood side by side at the sink and tried consciously to let the unease go, focusing instead on the comfortable reality of my life. My life was right here in this house. Two kids currently fighting over the last remaining chocolate chip cookie. A wife who respected me, who didn't laugh at my expense, who believed in me. Three diners that I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into building from absolutely nothing. Isabel couldn't touch any of that. Not really. Not in any way that truly mattered. Still, I went to bed that night with her name echoing unbidden in my head, staring up at the familiar shadows on the ceiling while Clara slept peacefully beside me, blissfully unaware of the potential storm gathering on the distant horizon. The next morning, I was back at the original diner, the first one, pouring coffee for a regular customer at the counter when my phone buzzed again in my pocket. The jolt of anxiety shot through me. I didn't look at it. I just shoved it deeper into my pocket, my jaw tightening. If it was her again, another notification, another intrusion, I didn't want to know. Not yet. I'd spent 15 long years deliberately, methodically locking her out of my life, building impenetrable walls. And now, suddenly, she was knocking. Quietly, perhaps, but persistently, steadily. Knocking. I forced myself to focus intently on the work at hand, manning the grill during the morning rush, working the counter, ringing up orders at the cash register, keeping my hands moving, keeping my voice steady and cheerful for the customers. She was out there, somewhere, watching, maybe waiting. But I was right here, standing tall in the middle of the life I had made. Whatever she wanted, whatever twisted game she was playing this time, I wasn't biting. Not yet. Maybe not ever if I could possibly help it. I was methodically wiping down the gleaming Formica counter at the original Brenda's Diner, the place where my new life had truly begun, when the little bell above the door jingled announcing new arrivals. And then they walked in. Isabel, Megan, and Olivia. Harper, thankfully, was absent. It was exactly 3 days after those unsettling Prolink alerts, and honestly, a tense part of me had been on edge ever since, half expecting something exactly like this, some kind of confrontation. The morning breakfast rush had just mercifully died down, leaving only a handful of lingering regulars scattered amongst the booths, slowly sipping their coffee. The air hung thick and heavy with the familiar, comforting sense of stale grease, burnt toast, and strong coffee. I saw them before they registered my presence behind the counter. Isabel first, her short, severe haircut catching the weak morning light filtering through the front window. Megan followed close behind, scanning the room with that same old arrogant swagger, though it seemed slightly forced now. And Olivia trailed last, looking uncomfortable, hunched slightly, almost like she desperately wanted to disappear into the worn upholstery of the nearest booth. My gut instantly twisted into a tight, cold knot. My hands froze mid-wipe on the smooth counter surface. 15 years. 15 long years since they'd callously ditched me at that desolate gas station, laughing as they drove away. And now, inexplicably, they were here, standing boldly in my diner, on my turf. I didn't move for a long moment, just watched them silently as they surveyed the room, then picked a booth near the window, Clara's old favorite booth. The irony wasn't lost on me, and slid onto the red vinyl seats. Their voices were low, hushed, but the cadence, the tones, were nauseatingly familiar. I could have easily stayed back in the kitchen, pretended I hadn't seen them, let one of the waitresses handle their table. Avoided the whole confrontation. But something stronger, something fiercer, pulled me out from behind the counter. Maybe it was pure, unadulterated anger, finally bubbling to the surface after all these years. Maybe it was just a grim, unavoidable need to finally see this through, to face them head on, once and for all. On my own terms this time. I grabbed a clean, heavy glass coffee pot, more for something solid to grip, something to anchor me, than out of any sense of waitress duty, and walked slowly, deliberately, over to their booth. Isabel spotted me first as I approached. Her eyes widened dramatically, her perfectly painted mouth dropping open in exaggerated surprise. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice shaky, actress perfect, like she hadn't meticulously rehearsed this exact moment in her head dozens of times. "Ethan? Is that, is that really you?" Megan leaned back against the vinyl cushion, affecting a casual air, that familiar condescending smirk instantly appearing on her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes this time. "Well, hey there, Ethan," she drawled, looking me up and down with mock appraisal. "Look at you, playing big shot diner owner now, huh?" Olivia glanced up quickly from the menu she was pretending to study, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting, uncomfortable second, then darted down again just as fast. Her hands fidgeted nervously with the laminated edge of the menu, a telltale sign of discomfort I recognized from years ago. I just stood there silently for a moment, the heavy coffee pot warm in my hand, looking down at the three of them. Older, definitely. More worn around the edges than their pro-length pictures suggested, and radiating a palpable air of desperation that I hadn't expected, that almost caught me off guard. "What do you want?" I asked finally, keeping my voice deliberately low, flat, devoid of any emotion, harder than I actually felt inside. Isabel shifted uncomfortably on the bench seat, leaning forward slightly, her fingers twisting nervously together in her lap. A stark contrast to the confident woman I remembered. "Ethan, please," she began, her voice soft, pleading. Can we just, can we just talk for a minute?" Her eyes welled up with predictable, readily available tears. "Please." I didn't sit down. I didn't offer them coffee. I didn't soften my stance, not by an inch. "I'm working right now," I stated flatly, gesturing vaguely around the diner. "So, talk." She swallowed visibly, glanced quickly at Megan as if seeking silent backup, then took a deep breath and started her obviously prepared speech. "Hi, Ethan," she began again, her voice regaining some of its practiced smoothness. "Look, we really need your help." And then it all spilled out in a rushed, disjointed tumble of words. Her carefully constructed life, the one she flaunted online, had apparently crashed and burned spectacularly. Her trendy little event planning business, Apex Consulting, or whatever fancy name she'd given it, had gone bankrupt. Her second marriage, to some wealthy older guy I didn't know and didn't care about, had recently fallen apart in a messy, expensive divorce. And now, she was broke. Utterly, humiliatingly broke, reduced to tracking down her abandoned ex-husband and begging for a handout. Megan jumped in then, her tone falsely bright, trying to make it sound casual, like it was no big deal at all. "Yeah, Ethan, I mean, look at you. You're obviously doing really well for yourself, right?" she said, gesturing around the diner with a sweep of her hand. "Three diners? Wow." She leaned forward conspiratorially. We just, we just need a little hand, you know? A small loan, maybe? Just to tide Isabel over. For old time's sake?" Olivia nodded mutely beside her, her gaze still fixed firmly on the tabletop, adding a barely audible murmur. "Yeah, just a little help, Ethan. Anything you can spare." I just listened silently, letting their words, their pathetic, self-serving narrative, wash over me, letting it all sink in without reacting. Isabel's practiced sob story. Megan's transparently manipulative charm offensive. Olivia's passive, guilt-ridden acquiescence. They'd clearly planned this whole ambush. Tracked me down through Prolink. Showed up here unannounced, expecting me to just roll over and play the nice guy, the forgiving fool, just like I always used to. I stood there motionless, the coffee still clutched tightly in my grip, watching them squirm under my unwavering, silent gaze. Isabel's eyes grew noticeably wetter, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path through her foundation. Megan's fake smirk twitched nervously at the edges. Olivia started methodically shredding the corner of her menu into tiny, anxious pieces. I remembered Isabel's obsessive scrolling stalking again. Those 52 views in a single day, culminating in this calculated appearance, this desperate plea. Thinking I'd just cave, just hand over my hard-earned money, simply because I used to be weak, because I used to let her walk all over me. Wait here, I said finally, my voice still flat, giving nothing away. I turned abruptly away from their expectant faces. I walked deliberately towards the small, cluttered back office, a cramped little box containing a scarred metal desk overflowing with invoices and a precarious stack of old receipt boxes. My work boots felt heavy, leaden, on the worn linoleum floor. They wanted money. My money. After leaving me penniless and alone on the side of a highway, laughing about it with each other for years probably. And now they actually thought, they genuinely expected, that I'd just hand it over to them? Just like that? Unbelievable. I sank heavily into the creaking office chair and stared blankly at the peeling paint on the wall opposite me. My hands were shaking slightly now, not from fear this time, but from a deep, cold, simmering anger. A righteous anger, 15 years in the making. I could have stormed back out there, yelled at them, cursed them out, thrown them bodily out of my diner. Made a huge, satisfying scene. But somehow, that felt too easy. Too much like playing their game. Instead, I reached into my wallet, pulled out my cash, and counted out some bills. Then I headed back out to their booth. They were still there, huddled together, whispering urgently, their heads snapping up in unison, expectant hopeful as I walked back towards them. Without a word, I dropped the small stack of cash onto the table directly in front of Isabel. I watched impassively as her fingers snatched it up greedily, her face momentarily lighting up with relief, maybe even a flicker of triumph. She quickly counted the bills. $73.50. Exactly. The precise cost of a one-way Greyhound bus ticket from Oak Creek back to the city where we used to live, the city she'd abandoned me near, 15 years ago. The cost it would have taken for me to get back to her that day, if I had chosen to. Her hopeful smile instantly crashed, dissolving into stunned disbelief. Her breath hitched audibly in her throat. Megan snatched the bills from Isabel's hand, her eyes blazing with fury as she glared up at me. "What the hell is this, Ethan?" she snapped, her voice sharp, incredulous. $73.50? Are you kidding me? I leaned in slightly over the table, lowering my voice so only they could hear, keeping it perfectly steady, cold, and devoid of any lingering emotion. "That's exactly what it would have cost me to get a bus ticket back to you and the life you left behind that day," I stated calmly, meeting her furious gaze without flinching. "I didn't buy that ticket then." My eyes flickered briefly to Isabel's pale, shocked face, then back to Megan. "You don't get more than that from me now." Isabel's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. No sound came out. Megan crumpled the bills in her fist and shoved them aggressively back towards me across the table. "You're a real jerk, you know that, Ethan?" she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "A complete asshole. After everything I cut her off sharply, my patience finally snapping. "After everything?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low now, barely controlled. "After everything you did?" My gaze hardened, sweeping over the three of them. "You left me stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing. You laughed about it. You played the victim online." I straightened up, standing tall over their booth. "Believe me, this is me being generous." Olivia flinched visibly at my words, her hands balling tightly into fists in her lap, but she remained stubbornly silent, her eyes downcast. I looked directly at Isabel, then Megan, then Olivia, holding each of their gazes for a long moment. Isabel looked pale and utterly defeated. Megan was practically vibrating with impotent fury. Olivia just looked, small, ashamed, and desperate to be anywhere else. "It's time for you to leave," I said, raising my voice slightly now, loud enough for the remaining customers and my staff to hear clearly. My tone was firm, decisive, leaving no room for argument. "Don't ever come back here." Without waiting for a response, I turned my back on them and walked calmly back towards the counter, my heart pounding heavily against my ribs, but my steps feeling surprisingly sure, steady, and light. My waitress, a young woman named Sarah, hovered nearby, looking uncertain, clearly having overheard the final exchange. I gave her a quick, reassuring wave. "They're done here, Sarah," I said quietly, grabbing a clean rag from under the counter, needing the simple, grounding act of wiping my hands clean. The three women sat there stunned for another minute, seemingly unable to process what had just happened. Then, slowly, awkwardly, they scrambled up from the booth. Isabel hastily shoved the crumpled $73.50 into her worn purse, her face a mask of humiliation. Megan muttered something vicious under her breath, shooting daggers at my back. Olivia trailed miserably behind them, refusing to meet anyone's eye. The little bell above the door jingled again as they pushed it open and practically fled outside, disappearing quickly down the street. And just like that, they were gone. The diner immediately seemed to slide back into its normal rhythm. Coffee cups clanked, forks scraped against plates. The regulars resumed their quiet conversations, almost as if the three ghosts from my past had never even been there at all. I stood behind the counter for a long moment, then deliberately poured myself a fresh cup of strong, black coffee, my hands surprisingly steady now. They had come crawling back, begging, expecting me to crumble, expecting me to bail them out, expecting the old, weak Ethan to magically reappear. And I hadn't. I'd shut them down completely. It wasn't loud or dramatic or messy. It was just cold, quiet, final. I took a slow sip of the hot, bitter coffee, the taste sharp and grounding on my tongue, and watched the ordinary life of the diner unfold around me. The regulars chatting about the weather, Sarah efficiently refilling sugar dispensers, the cook whistling tunelessly in the back, Isabel's calculated tears, Megan's impotent anger, Olivia's silent shame. None of it mattered anymore. It couldn't touch me. I had given them back exactly what they had given me all those years ago, just enough to walk away with nothing but the bitter taste of their own actions. Just enough for them to walk away, just like they had forced me to do. I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel particularly triumphant. I just felt free. Truly, finally, irrevocably free. Clara and I took the kids to the local park that following weekend. It was a beautiful, crisp fall day, the air smelling faintly of wood smoke, with colorful leaves crunching satisfyingly under our boots as we walked. Our son, full of boundless energy, ran ahead, joyfully kicking a bright red soccer ball across the browning grass, while our younger daughter clung tightly to my hand, excitedly pointing out every single scampering squirrel she spotted in the tall oak trees. Clara walked easily beside me, her arm brushing comfortably against mine, her presence a warm, steady anchor in my world. We didn't say much, just watched the kids play, breathed in the cool autumn air, simply lived in the peacefulness of the ordinary moment. For a fleeting second, the image of Isabel's face flashed through my mind, her showing up unexpectedly at the diner, her voice cracking with fake emotion as she begged for help. And then, just as quickly, I consciously let it go. Dismissed it. She couldn't take this away from me. This simple, profound happiness. She couldn't even come close to touching it. I had built this life, this family, this contentment, entirely without her, arguably despite her. And it was infinitely richer, deeper, and more real than anything she had ever offered me, anything we had ever shared. "You're quiet today," Clara observed gently, nudging me playfully with her shoulder. "Just happy," I replied simply, meeting her warm gaze, and she squeezed my hand tightly in understanding, knowing instinctively that I meant it with every fiber of my being. Back home later that evening, we all ate bowls of Clara's famous chili, predictably a little too spicy for the kids. They complained loudly between mouthfuls, but they still managed to shovel it all down anyway, scraping their bowls clean. I sat contentedly at our familiar wooden kitchen table, watching them bicker playfully over who got the last buttery dinner roll, while Clara rolled her eyes affectionately at their noisy antics. This, this messy, chaotic, wonderful life. This was it. The best revenge, if you could even call it that, wasn't some dramatic confrontation or gloating display of success. It wasn't about rubbing their noses in my happiness or their misfortune. It was simply this: living well, living authentically, living a real, fulfilling life, completely free from their toxic influence. Isabel had wanted me to break back then. She and her friends had probably expected me to eventually crawl back, defeated, and begging for forgiveness for some imagined slight. And I hadn't. I'd walked away from that desolate gas station, walked away from her, from that entire life, and just kept putting one foot in front of the other, determinedly moving forward. Marcus at the shelter offering gruff guidance. Brenda giving me a chance at the diner. Clara's unwavering belief and easy laughter. These incredible kids, my son and my daughter, filling our home with noise and joy. Every single step taken since that day, every single piece of this life I now cherished, had been mine alone to earn. They hadn't just lost because I'd refused to bail them out. They'd lost the moment I stopped playing their cruel, manipulative game 15 years ago. The days continued to roll on, falling into their comfortable, predictable rhythm. School runs in the morning, busy shifts managing the diners, quiet evenings spent curled up with Clara on the couch after the kids were finally asleep. I didn't look back anymore. There was simply no need to. Isabel was just a fading memory now, a distant shadow from a past life that thankfully couldn't reach me here, couldn't hurt me anymore. Occasionally, I'd catch a fleeting glimpse of her in my mind's eye, her condescending smirk, her manipulative tears, but the image didn't stick, didn't sting like it used to. I just turned the radio up a little louder in the car, expertly flip a burger on the grill, hug my daughter tight when I got home, and the ghost of Isabel would simply fade away again into the background noise of my busy, happy life. The diners continued to thrive, becoming beloved fixtures in the Oak Creek community. The kids grew taller, louder, navigating the ups and downs of school and friendships. Clara and I continued to build our life together, arguing occasionally over silly, mundane things like whose turn it was to finally mow the overgrown lawn, or who forgot to buy milk at the grocery store. It was simple. It was messy. It was real. It was perfect. Sometimes I'd wake up early, before the sun, make a pot of strong coffee, and just stand quietly in our darkened kitchen, looking out the window at the peaceful suburban yard bathed in the pre-dawn light. And I'd feel it wash over me, deep and certain. Peace. A profound, steady sense of peace I never thought possible all those years ago. One cool evening, long after the kids were tucked into bed, I sat alone out on the back porch swing, nursing a cold beer, the night air crisp and clean against my skin. Clara came out a few minutes later, wrapped snugly in a soft, worn blanket, and sat down quietly beside me, the swing swaying gently. "What's on your mind tonight, Ethan?" she asked softly, her voice a comforting presence in the darkness. I took a slow sip of my beer, staring up at the vast expanse of stars scattered across the inky black sky. "Nothing, really," I said honestly, then smiled, a genuine, contented smile spreading across my face. "And everything." She leaned her head comfortably against my shoulder, her warmth seeping through my shirt, and we just sat there together in companionable silence for a long time, listening to the distant chirp of crickets, simply being. Isabel was gone. Truly, finally gone from my head and my heart. And I was here, whole, happy. The best revenge, I realized with utter clarity in that quiet moment, wasn't revenge at all. It was this. Right here, right now. A life so good, so full, so authentically mine, that I didn't need to prove a single damn thing to anyone, least of all to her. I'd made it. Against all odds, I'd actually made it. And that, I knew with unwavering certainty, was more than enough.